Hello.
Hello, everybody. That was Just Like Fire by Pink, and you are back with me, Jai Baldwin,
and me, Ned Saunders,
and me, Philipp Kostelecky. I'm about to put a bet on. Oh yeah.
There we go. Crazy in Love. So this is No Laughing Matter, and we're going to start off with one of our favourite little sections that Mr. Ned created. Would you like to introduce it, sir?
Certainly. The title of the bit is Isn't That Interesting? Which is a fact-based conversational little game where we try and bring interesting facts and impress our peers pathetically.
Yes. Well, I've got several facts, actually. I've got two. One of them's a fact and one of them's more of a lesson. But maybe you'd be interested to hear it.
Humorous and educational.
So I'm wondering who would like to kick off proceedings. Ned, would you like to go first?
Okay, I will do mine, but I will tell you that I'm not certain that mine is even true. I found this online at about 3 a.m. one night, and it is that
As you do.
Yes, as I often do. The song Toxic, popularised by Britney Spears, was originally written and offered to Christina Aguilera.
Yeah,
but
I
she
actually heard of
declined
that. I think that's true.
Well,
there was another artist that it was offered to, yeah.
Okay, that might be. I'm just trying to remember that because I forgot to get an interesting fact because I'm a
very interesting.
I think Pink actually wrote "Party in the USA," but then it was given to Miley Cyrus.
Oh wow,
that's not my fact. I'm just saying.
That is interesting.
My fact is animal-based, yet again,
of course.
because animals are just fascinating creatures. And I'm here to tell you that octopus's testicles are located in their head.
I love that.
And I think that's very interesting.
I admire them so much. That's amazing.
But also the other thing I was going to talk about was Rome. I was trying to find out, because there's a common phrase, Rome wasn't built in a day, and I was looking for...
Don't tell me it actually was.
No, I was looking to try and find how long it took to actually build it, but then it's been sort of destroyed and ravaged and pillaged and burned down so many times that basically the only answers I could get were like thousands of years to track it from then till now. So there's no answer to how long it took to build Rome.
Okay, so your interesting fact
is that you don't know.
It's something that no one knows.
Exactly, and I think that's interesting in its own right.
It is interesting. It's an interesting thing.
All right, I got a whoop daddy of an interesting fact here. All right, so for those of you who don't know, I study biology, so mine is animal based as well. But there is a bird called the lily trotter. And what it does is essentially any animal would like to preserve its own genetic, things being passed on to the offspring, right? So what it does is if it finds a male that has like it's brooding the eggs or whatever, taking care of them, what it will do is if it finds that male, it will destroy those eggs, kill them, and then proceed to have intercourse with this male, right? Because it wants to make sure that whatever genes are passed on, that's their genes, right? And the female is much larger than the male, so they're able to have control of them. The funny thing is, though, imagine the conversation that would happen later. Mommy, where did you meet Daddy? Oh, yes, he was just killing your half-siblings. I knew he was the one for me.
Oh, lovely.
I thought that was an interesting fact.
It's a cruel animal world out there.
It's jungle out there.
So, yes, that was... Oh, isn't it interesting? And wasn't it interesting?
Indeed it was.
So now we'll move on to talk about the topic that we're focusing on this week, which is offensive comedy and being offended by comedy, which is obviously, as comedians, something we're eternally interested in and concerned
something which is
by.
very, very relevant at the moment. There's lots of big stories every week. It seems some comedians got in trouble or some comedian is defending political correctness. There's lots of disagreements and agreements on the subject. It's not a set thing at the moment.
No, not at all. And so the topics we're going to be looking at specifically are issues of censorship, certain words, trigger words that set people off, why maybe they do that, and we're going to be looking at minorities, that is a very silly way to put it.
We're going to be looking at them.
It's not funny, that was a silly thing to say. We're going to be looking at is it alright to make a joke if it's only affecting a small group of people, things like that. At what point do you draw the line of, it doesn't really matter, and when it does really matter?
Yeah. And I think Philipp, for those who have seen Philipp perform, maybe aware as to why his presence here might happen to coincide with the theme.
Yes,
of the radio show.
I'm an expert at offending people while doing comedy. I'll be happy to share some of my stories. But I've also have a lot of thoughts recently about it, and I have some notes prepared if you haven't noticed. Little blue pieces of paper.
It's more prepared than we ever have been or will ever be for this show.
Yes, exactly. So I thought I'd lend my hand here.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, what are your on the surface?
On the surface,
general views on?
I am obviously. Well, I have to explain my environment that I grew up in. Right, when I was in I grew up in Slovenia, most of it, and that kind of environment kind of facilitates itself towards less of this like in Slovenia, along with all the other what are they called, Balkan countries. There's sort of this idea that you just make fun of each other. You make fun of your neighbors, right? If a Slovenian, a Serbian, and a Croatian meet together, which is the sort of a good joke, they meet together, the first thing they do, or after a few drinks, the first thing they start doing is telling jokes about the other people.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic.
And so there's a solidarity around that, right? So when I grew up, it was kind of, I would always hear jokes, people making fun of Serbians or Bosnians or whatever, and they didn't care. So my opinion is, well, if I can make fun of my neighbor, everybody should be able to make fun of their neighbors, and it's a sort of solidarity around that. So that's where the idea comes from. But obviously, it's a bit more complicated than just that, and so I think we can talk about that as well.
I'm one of those people who's going to be kind of generally in defense of political correctness, because I think it does a lot of things, and it's a movement which is rooted in niceness and just not hurting people.
Yeah.
But I do think that there are definitely lots of interesting little lines to cross and to talk about. So, yeah, I mean, Joe, how do you feel about this?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, all of my stand-up is sort of as close to just completely PC as you can get, really. I hate the idea that I might upset anyone in any way. And so I do end up almost being very apologetic.
Philipp revels in it, he loves it.
And very, very nice about things, because I feel like there are plenty of topics out there that are so universal in our understanding of them. That I at least can just focus on those and make people laugh with those rather than necessarily upsetting the boat.
But comedy by its nature is critical, right? You're saying basically.
Okay, well that's an interesting perspective. What makes you say that?
John Cleese was talking about this, and he said by its nature, comedy is critical, right? Because what you're doing is. I was actually going to explain a little bit how comedy works because I've analyzed it to a bit, and I have a diagram here, and I'll show you guys. Basically, comedy is essentially divergence of expectation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so your mind will take path A and path B. Let's say I start a sentence, right? There's a joke that, what's his name? The famous Annie Hall, the guy who directed Annie Hall.
I don't know.
I do not know.
Anyway, Woody Allen, yeah, him.
Yeah,
He starts the joke or whatever, right? And you don't know how it's going to finish. And so your mind has created paths, A, B, what you think the end of the sentence is going to be. But the comedian's job is to find C. And so to essentially redirect it. And I think naturally when you're trying to take an alternative path, you're going to be critical of something.
Well, I don't know. There's things like, it's a really common... In musical comedy, it's a really common joke that you'll set up an expectation by a rhyme scheme. So you make the audience think that you're going to say something that obviously rhymes with something. And I do it a lot. It's a cheap, easy one. Yeah. And it's when you make it sound like it's going to be something bad or awful or dirty. Yeah. And then actually you change it to something nice. And that's subverting expectations. But when I do that, I'm not criticizing a group. I'm not criticizing a theology.
Well,
But you're being critical of their expectation in a way, aren't you?
Well, I don't know if the audience feels insulted by that.
Yeah, it's true. We've been talking for a while.
I was about to butt in and say, I think it's time for some music.
Oh, it is.
So we're going to leave you with some Up and Up by Coldplay.
Oh, gotta love Coldplay.
Yeah. What, lads? Bow!
Hello, and welcome back to No Laughing Matter.
That was a groovy tune.
Where we've been discussing offensive comedy.
That band.
So the next section of the show is one we didn't actually get around to doing last week, which is called Thunderbolts and Lightning.
Very, very frightening me.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Where we will be having a sort of competition, a pun-off. Going around in a circle, all trying to make a pun on a given topic, which Philip, our guest, will select, so that he has the advantage. And we can all pass once, but upon completely failing, we will be evicted from the process until we have one person who is standing alone as the king of Pun Hill.
Pun Hill.
It's a real place, look it up.
Okay.
The king of Punderland.
So do I do the topic then?
Yes, have you decided your topic?
Do something like a category kind of thing.
Okay, so can I do electronics?
Sure.
Electronics, okay.
Do I have to start though?
Yeah.
Yes.
Why would I choose the topic? Okay, electronic. I pun about electronics. Pass.
Okay, he's passed already.
Oh, good lord.
Ned.
Well, I would just like to say that I have an electric mix of puns based around that subject. Eclectic, electric. Is that
there we go. That'll do. That's
okay,
your turn.
Good.
Well, see, I quite like watching programs, except documentaries. I don't really like them. They're not quite my cup of TV.
That was awful.
Not bad.
There you go.
Are you going again,
Stop.
Philip?
No, I think it's someone else gives the topic now. Or do I get
Oh,
the
we
topic?
keep going. We're going to
on
stay
this.
on this topic. Otherwise, it'll go on forever.
Oh, that's how it works. Okay,
Yes.
well, I wasn't thinking of doing a new pun in the meantime. When I'm on stage, I feel like I'm sitting on my couch because I feel microphone.
Oh, you can stay in just for that.
That visibly hurt.
That did. All right, Ned.
I think I've got a bit of a corker. You know, during the Bush administration, there was a brief time when you weren't allowed to watch TV in the Middle East because they had a telly ban.
Oh. Did you just make that up right now?
It's my old music teacher.
Oh, I thought there was supposed to be unique ones.
Stolen.
Good.
Oh, come on.
Well done, stolen
Come on.
goods. Disqualified.
Oh.
So my next one. Well, you see, I've had a problem with my sink recently. I can't get it to work. I've lost the plug.
But that's like, isn't
Electricity.
it? Yeah, I get.
Is that too
Okay.
close to a sink pun?
No, we'll let that pass.
fine.
No, 'cause
Right.
it's a socket plug.
Let's keep going with this train of fun.
Oh yeah, I was at the airport, but they didn't want to let this woman go through security. I guess they couldn't process her. Processor?
Oh,
that was quite
yes,
good.
it's an electronic device.
Okay,
yes.
I go on. I was in the woods and I saw a bear and it was made of electricity and someone said, "Oh, what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to sock it."
Hey.
That one I did come up with. That's why it was terrible.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? This game's getting a bit silly. I'm not
Yeah.
even remotely interested anymore.
Oh, neither am I, honestly.
Hey! So there you go. We've had some.
It was a beautiful little moment whilst it lasted.
I think
We've
your
had some
game would
fun
work better if it
puns.
was just like one pun each, and then that's it.
Well,
And then you say who had the
that's-
best pun.
That's a good piece of structural feedback, which we will discuss later.
I'll put it on my
So-
response form at the end of this. You guys hand those out, right?
Of
Yeah, we
course.
hand out these response forms. They normally come back with just pictures of people crying on them.
And just, like,
That's what Abby
tears and
handed in
little
last week.
blood spatters.
Anyway, we're now going to be talking about the topic of censorship.
Yes, we
which is
are.
a very interesting
And
topic.
we're not going to talk about this topic because we've been censored. Wait.
Hey.
Sound
Talk
effect for
about
that.
trying to.
With
huh?
all the terrible jokes that go around in the show, we need a sound effect.
Well, I think censorship is a very interesting topic at the moment because it's been everywhere from a very early part of our lives. From
Yeah.
the cartoons we used to watch as children have been censored in some way, to the media that we still consume has been censored in some way or other. What politicians say, what anybody says, certain things will be ousted out, altered, fixed. Which is strange because it removes an element of liveness or genuineness to something.
I've heard a lot of comedians who say that comedy is one of the last remaining spaces where you can get away from censorship. I think that's interesting. If you go to these kind of London open mic nights, or you go to these kind of underground shows, and you do get people, there is no limits to what people can talk about. There is no censorship, but obviously with TV stuff, with more mainstream stuff, I mean, Michael McIntyre's entire set has gone from proper risque to family friendly in the time it took for him to become a TV comedian.
But was he really that risque earlier?
I'm exaggerating maybe. I've heard stories that he was a lot
I mean,
worse
because
than
Frank,
he...
if we talk about, let's talk about the UK here, since this will be most reference points, even though I'm not as well versed in that for comedy wise. But like I'm saying is, you basically have Michael McIntyre out of the mainstream.
Yeah.
Michael McIntyre's on one end, and then Frankie Boyle's on the other, right?
Yes.
But Frankie Boyle doesn't get censored, so I think censorship. Are you talking about the idea of censorship, or what is it good or bad?
You say he doesn't get censored. He's had his show shut down many different times because of jokes he's made that have been deemed too
fair
far.
enough. But is the idea here is it censorship good or bad, or are we talking about?
You can have whatever opinion you want. It's just a general open
I'm
discussion on the
generally
topic.
anti-censorship.
It
goes hand in hand with
I think in certain
offensiveness.
situations. I mean, you have censorships on college campuses or something like that, where you have these extreme censorship. I don't know. We're talking about this later, but where people I think censorship also ties into this political correctness idea, and I think there are two types of political correctness. There's political correctness, right, when you're being politically correct, and there's also political factual correctness and political factual incorrectness, right? So if somebody says a general statement about someone else, that's not politically incorrect. That's politically factually incorrect, as in that is not a true statement. And I think when people are like, oh, you're saying something that might offend somebody, you have to be a bit more careful there. Is he saying something that's true or false? That's the real issue there. And that's something that I think people should also be careful of in censorship.
It's true or false is an interesting one, because if you're in the audience and you're one of these comedians who likes to, deal with hecklers and talk to people, and someone in the audience has a terrible burn mark all over their face and is clearly in a lot of pain and very unhappy with it. If you were to then go and point that out and use it as part of your material, you are correct and factual in observing that point and talking about it, but it still would be regarded as politically incorrect.
Yes, of course. What I'm saying is that that's like, there are sometimes where people say a statement and you're like, oh, that's politically incorrect. And like, it's not just politically incorrect, it's factually wrong. I think that's what I'm trying to say here. And I think
you haven't spoken in a bit. Do you want to?
Yeah, you go ahead. Sorry.
That's an interesting. It's all right. I just bide my time. I make my words golden.
Actually, plans his words.
Sorry, what was the last comment you just made, Philip? I was going to bounce off it. Yes, about factual incorrectness and political correctness. I think, well, there's some connection there. You have a responsibility to not lie to people about things like that. I think that when it comes to political correctness, there's certain times that it makes sense, and there's other times that it doesn't when it comes to censorship. Like, for example, this is a very niche, random example, but in some children's cartoons that originated in Japan, animes like Pokemon, etc., they removed pieces of Japanese imagery, such as rice balls or commonly eaten food like sushi, and replaced it with Americanized versions like sandwiches. In that instance, that sort of censorship seems utterly pointless. That
is very weird. It's almost like you're denying that it is from the country it's from.
Exactly.
I mean, it makes sense if it's to be more relatable to the audience.
Is oppressing a cultural voice and also insulting the intelligence of its viewers, I think, that they somehow can't handle that. And so in those instances where you've just changed something or covered something up for no real reason, got to ask why you're doing it. Anyway, the pun section went on for a little bit, so we're going to leave you with some more songs.
Blink-182.
I'll do Blink-182.
Bored to Death.
Lots of lovely early 2000s nostalgia coming right up.
Alright, stay tuned to Insanity Radio.
Oh my god, what was that?
I have no idea. And we're back. Oh, sorry, that's your job.
And we're back. Hello, everybody. This is No Laughing Matter, where we are discussing offensive comedy. We were just talking about the topic of censorship, but we weren't really reaching any particular conclusion. So we're actually going to rein it back to maybe where this conversation should have started, with what is offensive in the first place. We're just going to talk about stories, tell some little anecdotes, and just discuss those.
I had a discussion with my sister over the Easter break. Basically, what happened was we were talking about the offensive comedy, and I was telling her about this thing that I'm preparing, which is like a speech that I'll do at the end, because I'm trying to work on my closers, because if some of you have seen my stuff, you may know it's a little bit offensive, and I tried to end saying, look, the reason I do this...
I've seen you do like kind of like a work in progress version.
I've done one, and then I'm working on another one.
Okay.
And so, like, I'm trying to work on a closer, and I was telling my sister, I have this really good closer I'm working on, a different one, and like, I kind of just proved how the audience is actually being ignorant at this point. And she was like...
Nothing gets an audience on your side, like insulting them.
Yeah, and then she was like, is that a smart idea, do you think? I'm like, I don't know. And then she said, I'm trying to just make it clear that my jokes are not really offensive. And she said, because she saw me perform once at the cabaret that we did, and she said, well, it wasn't really clear then if you were joking or not. And I said, well, what do you mean? She's like, well, you gotta be careful. And so, do you think it's the comedian's job to be careful, or can we just like assume that they're right with the offensiveness?
I think the comedian's job is to make people laugh.
Yeah.
But I think there is a slight truth that it's the comedian's obligation to be careful.
Yeah.
The comedian is, in a way, morally, they have that power. They're on the stage. They have people listening to them. So I think there is a moral obligation to not hurt people or damage people. Also, you're saying that you thought that you were trying to tell the audience that your jokes were offensive.
What I'm saying is like,
if you're trying to tell them that they weren't offensive, if they're offended by it, it's offensive by definition. It's not about what your intention was. It's about their reaction. That's what makes it offensive.
It can't be determined by the comedian, because at that point you almost enter a sort of dictatorship style relationship where
who's on stage? Who's on stage?
Well, exactly. And if anyone kind of gave off a whiff of that genuine attitude, you would take an immediate disliking to them. And your job as a comedian, really, or your intention at least, should be to get people to like you and laugh at you. And you're not going to be doing that if you're upsetting them or insulting them in any way. So it's very much your job to make sure that the audience is happy.
I've seen some comedians in open mic who have done offensive stuff and it hasn't gone down well, and their way of trying to get out of it is trying to justify themselves, like really kind of hastily, and it just gets worse and stuff. They start insulting the audience for not getting it. But the ones who have really done well are the ones who realise it and then try and work around it and try and get the audience back on side rather than insult them.
Here's my question though. what can a comedian not talk about? Because my sister, when I'm bringing it up again, she was talking with me, and she said, there are some things that you as a white male heterosexual should not be able to talk about. For example, I could not make a joke about black slavery or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Even though I've seen Bill Burr as a comedian, he does it where he talks about.
So even though I've seen 12 Years a Slave, I know the struggle.
No. Bill Burr is a comedian in the States, and he talks about this, and he kind of does it in a unique way. We're not going to get into it now, obviously, but unless you guys want to. But he essentially talks about how the slavery, as in how when he watches NBA, he always sees as like basketball. There's always most of the players are African American, right? And they're really good at the sport. Mm-hmm. And he said, it's because this years of slavery or whatever has kind of. It sounds horrible when he says it, but he says that it's kind of artificially selected them to be great at sports because they've had to struggle so much and only the fittest survived. It sounds horrible, right? But when he says it, he says that, and he says, and there's always part of me that wants to believe that that's actually true, but I know it's not. And he kind of talks about that. So, like, do you? I know I didn't need to explain, but do you think there are some topics you cannot talk about?
Making pained faces, but I can see that working in context.
Yeah, in context.
You're hurting me.
Yeah, but like. And also, quick disclaimer: these are my opinions, not reflective of Insanity Radio, and the same for my two respective.
Send angry tweets to Bill Burr after this.
Yes, but do you think there's something you cannot talk about?
Well, to just quickly bounce off the last comment you made, I think that comments such as that, where you want to believe something like that, even though you know it's wrong, surely only stem from an insecurity or a dissatisfaction with yourself.
Yeah.
But taking that into what you can't talk about on stage, I mean, anything that if you don't feel confident in talking about something, you shouldn't be talking about it, full stop, in my opinion. You have to have 100% faith that what you're saying is something you're entitled to say. If you've even got an inkling of doubt in your mind, then I feel like you can't really be saying it, because then that means you can't be wholly supporting what you're saying. And if it's something that some people might perceive to be offensive, you have to be coming from a position where you're ready to openly discuss that.
No, I think that's a really good way to sum it up. But it's interesting, I do, I talk about controversial topics. I talk about Islam, I talk about different race and things like that.
It's funny, isn't it funny how nowadays religion is a controversial topic? I'm just saying, isn't that horrible?
Well, it's always been, Crusades, it's always been.
It's always been, but it's like nowadays, not to continue your point, of course, but I think that's just says something, huh? But continue, yeah.
I don't know, but yeah, and so rarely, it's happened a few times, but so rarely do I have people come up and saying, I'm offended by this, what you've done is wrong. And although you do very well when it doesn't happen, that happens quite a lot to you.
It does, but I think it's also how you go about it. I think I need to be a bit more graceful in the way that I do it. I kind of, because I'm used
swan delivering terrorist jokes.
No, that's not what I do. I don't talk about really terrorism, but the thing is, it's like you just have to be a bit more graceful with it, and it's how you do it. I think Ricky Gervais said it once. He said it's not what you say, it's just how you say it.
Yeah, I mean,
everybody said that, but he says with comedy, there's nothing you can't talk about. It just depends how you do it. And the main goal of any joke is to be funny. If your offensive joke is not funny, it's a failed joke. Simply as that.
I'm inclined to agree with the idea of you can talk about anything as long as you frame it right. Do you feel similarly, Jar, or do you disagree? Or
yes. I mean, I personally believe I'm going to agree with Philip and say that if your joke has not been perceived to be funny, then you are wrong. The audience has to be the people that are correct here. It can't be the comedians.
I think that's a good point.
All the time.
Well, that's, I think, the kind of general summary of this is that the audience are right. They have the final say in what's offensive and what's not.
But I think the comedian can affect that as well. We'll talk about that.
Okay,
we're going to take another brief break for some music. So this is We Didn't Start the Fire by Billy Joel.
Absolute classic.
It is, isn't it? I like the beginning where it's just really quiet, and then...
Hello and welcome back to No Laughing Matter, where we are still discussing offensive comedy. So we just had a story from Philip regarding his comedy, and now I'm going to talk about a story of myself. Yesterday, as part of the Roscar nominations on campus, me, alongside the rest of the Drama Society Committee, had to perform a 2 to 3 minute piece of dance theatre on the EU referendum. And one such section of this, which in retrospect I'm not particularly comfortable with, was a moment in which all of the white members of our cast formed a wall, and all of the non-white members of the cast attempted to breach it before being rejected, turning to the audience and sort of doing a mock crying sort of thing. And now I must, just to sort of put this into a context for you, it was a a sort of parody piece of dance theatre. It was very sort of self-aware and silly in the nature of what it was doing. But
it was trying to satirize kind of political pieces, like political art. Kind of.
Yes, despite being a sort of parody of a parody, it still happened.
Did you feel comfortable doing that, though?
In rehearsals, we all sort of laughed at it and thought it was funny, but when I was in the room and actually doing it, I suddenly thought, well, you have to think contextually that actually there's a lot of weight to this issue. People trying to come into the country and being rejected.
It's horrendous.
It's huge.
I'm very surprised that happened, and I wouldn't be comfortable with that. I mean, I missed the actual performance.
No.
I think, for me personally, this is ironic though, because I'm fine doing offensive comedy, but something like that would be uncomfortable for me, because that's essentially my family. I mean, my grandparents had to leave Slovenia and then move to America, and it was tough for them to move. And they had to leave Slovenia as well, so they had to cross a lot of borders. And then me as well, I'm living here, and we have the EU referendum coming up, I'm living here as an EU citizen. So for me, that's something interesting to talk about.
Well, you do in your comedy, you do jokes about genuinely terrible and sad things, I mean, regarding yourself and your family and your kind of background and everything.
I guess, yeah. So for me to do it myself is comfortable, but I think something like this, especially because you're essentially saying that, you're making fun of the struggle, and I think it can be done better. And I think this was not a very good way to do it.
Exactly, and this was the problem, because everyone in the room at the time, regardless of race, was endorsing the idea and sort of laughing at it together. But I think that really that's just putting forward a certain cultural idea that almost it's not a problem. By laughing at it in that way, it's almost as if we're disrespecting it by turning a blind eye to it. It would be the same as making jokes about absolutely horrible events. Such as 9/11 or something like that. They've affected
7/11, according to Donald Trump.
All that. Let's not talk about Donald Trump. That have affected so many people.
Oh no.
And so imagine that if you're someone who has tried to enter the country and has been pushed away, be it fair or otherwise. That's going to upset them.
Yeah. This does feed a little bit into the who can and cannot. You were saying about being a straight white male. You find it like people will criticise you for that, for making jokes. I find there's something really quite uncomfortable about the fact that there's such a lovely white middle class kind of group of people, and they're all drama students and kind of oblivious to world, and they're making these kind of really heavy-handed, albeit mockingly, but kind of like political statements in a way that looks a bit, oh god, do you really have much of a right as who you are to make these?
But I think it's the right as well that we can talk about. I mean, you can kind of diverge from the story itself, but the right, who has the right to talk about these issues? Because a lot of black comedians talk about black history or whatever. A lot of Mexican comedians talks about that kind of stuff. But I think it really, it's not that you don't have the right to say it or whatever, right? But you have to talk about it from your perspective.
Yes.
That's the most interesting part of comedy, is completely. Your perspective on the matter. And if you cannot be like a liberal drama student, right? And then make a skit about how if people have a tough time entering the country. I think that can be considered offensive. And maybe in your when you rehearsals, it didn't become as real as it should have.
No, because as you say, that wasn't expressing anyone's opinion. None of us have had struggles entering or leaving a country. We're all laughing at a topic that we're most likely not sufficiently informed about, and equally hasn't affected me. But if you actually sort of break it down and think about it, so many of the people in this country have been affected by it in ways they don't even know. For example, I mean, I'm a quarter Indian on my mother's side of the family. My grandfather is Indian, and my grandmother is white British, and that obviously can't have occurred without difficulty of going through borders. And there was a courage there to foster a relationship between the two of them, despite the fact that at the time sort of interracial things like that would have been frowned upon.
So I think the point we can make here is that it's not just your individual, but it's your perspective on the issue as well. And once again, it's how you do it.
Do you have a bit more time to talk, or are we going to?
Aren't you going to play that fun little game? Where you
yes. No, we're now going to move on to a little game which will interest you, called Terrible Jokes for Terrible People, where we will all, over the course of the next song, be writing a completely original joke or piece of stand-up material, which we will all be reading out live on the air.
Based off of a topic which is given to us by our guest, Philip.
Oh, no, in fact, we're all going to be picking...
sorry, I got that wrong.
And donate
so
that
do I give Giant a topic?
Left. So, you give me a topic, I'll give Ned a topic.
Cheese.
Cheese, okay.
Did we have that last week? Did you have that last week?
No, we didn't.
Okay, I got cheese. You got cheese.
Okay.
Hit me, Joe, hit me.
Ned, I would like you to do a piece of comedy on dance.
On dance?
As we've just been discussing it.
Okay. Philip, I would like you to do a joke about old castles.
Old castles. All right, yeah, okay, let's do it. Do you want to play the next song?
Yes.
Yeah. Leonard Skinner, Sweet Home Alabama, what a classic.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Terrible Jokes for Terrible People, where we will all be telling a piece of stand-up that we have just written over the course of the last song.
Yep.
So I was given the topic of cheese by Philip, and so this is what I've written about cheese. I went to court the other day. There was a discrepancy between some cheeses. There had been a murder in the Midlands. Blood had been spilt. There was red in Leicester. One cheese had lost a close family member in this accident, which had left them feeling rather blue.
Oh.
The defendant, a piece of Swiss cheese, well, frankly, their testimony was full of holes.
Oh my God.
And nothing was really resolved. The judge didn't have a tiny hammer, so they rung their baby bell to bring a close to proceedings.
Oh, jeez.
Well done. There's so many others.
That was my day in court.
So many
I
cheese
think
puns
if we
you
didn't
put in there.
choose cheese for the Thunderbolts and Lightning, you would have absolutely
Destroyed
swept the
it,
floor.
yeah.
Well, there we go. So, Philip, what have
I
managed
gave you
to
my
conjure?
Parmesan, though, so you're allowed to do it. Wait, all right. So I had to talk about old castles. I don't have a lot, but I was thinking, I've been to a lot of old castles in my life, and have you ever done up the stairs in an old castle? They're ridiculously steep.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought a new way to improve, the Stairmaster, is to have like the European old castle Stairmaster. So it's like ridiculously steep, and you have to walk up, and then when you're walking up, every once in a while, like another person will be walking down, and you have to go out of the way because there's other tourists at this castle, and you're walking up, and then it gets there's a narrow part towards the center of the stairwell, and then it's a bit thicker at the end, and it changes. So it's like a really kind of like a free running experience within the old castle thing. That's all I got.
To be fair, every time I've been to castles, I just want to climb on them, desperately.
And Ned, what have you managed to write?
Okay, I had the topic of dance, and this is terrible. I'm not even sure how much of it is allowed, but it's the controversial episode, so who cares? When I think of dance, the first thing that immediately comes to mind is elegance. Elegance is the name of a stripper who works in my local strip club, who is the greatest pole dancer I've ever met in my entire life. I cannot dance. I'm not fit. I'm the kind of person who sweats when he thinks too hard. I cannot lift people, I have weak arms, I strain to put on glasses. And I've always thought that dancing is a lot like stand-up comedy. It requires grace and elegance, and I'm pretty sure if Philip did it, he'd find a way to make it racist.
Ah, well done.
Oh, there we go. A little bit of a roast at the end there. Oh, Philip, does this offend you?
Are you triggered?
Yeah, triggers. Yeah, we forgot to talk about that trigger words.
Oh, well, we can never discuss every single topic on such big issues as we're trying to tackle in 7 hours over the course of a month and a half. But, we hope you've enjoyed today's session so far. Are there any sweeping closing statements any of you fancy making?
I need a plug. I'm going to plug my show. The Sunday show is every Sunday, 7 to 8. This week we're going to have Guy Berry on, who we all know, a lovely, funny comedian.
He's a lovely, wonderful human being and a fantastic comedian.
Wow, that sounds rehearsed. Did he pay you to say that?
Yes, so much money.
And Ned will be coming on the week after, and eventually Jai will hopefully be coming on. It's a Sunday show, that's where it's at. It's a pretty fun show, enjoy that. But I like today's discussion. I think we can end, you can say whatever you want as long as you say it right.
Yeah.
As in right-winged.
Intent and effect, ladies and
I
gentlemen.
think intent and effect, I always go on and on about it. I promise not to bring it up because it's my thing, but that is completely the way to go forward.
Right, so thank you very much for listening. We'll be leaving you now with a song which is Aggressive by Beartooth. I've been Jai Baldwin.
I've been Ned Sanders.
I've been Philip Carl Kostelecky.
And thank you very much for listening to No Laughing Matter. Have a beautiful week.
We're out.
Bye!